Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this morning I'll be speaking about another discourse of the Buddha, this one from the Samyutta Nikaya. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through the discourse and give some explanation, and then I'll take any questions at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this is from the Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 35, sutta number 241. This is from the Salayatana Samyutta, the chapter on the six senses. So the discourse begins. It says, at one time the Buddha was staying near Kosambi on the bank of the Ganges River. Seeing a large tree trunk being carried along by the current, he addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, do you see that large tree trunk being carried along by the current of the Ganges River? And they replied, yes, Bhante. And the Buddha says, mendicants, assume that the tree trunk does not collide with the near shore or the far shore, or sink in the middle, or get stranded on high ground. And assume that it does not get taken by humans or by non-humans, or caught up in a whirlpool, and that it doesn't rot away. In that case, that tree trunk will slant, slope, and incline towards the ocean. Why? Because the current of the Ganges River slants, slopes, and inclines towards the ocean. So the Buddha says, in the same way, assuming that you don't collide with the near shore or the far shore, sink in the middle, or get stranded on high ground, assuming that you don't get taken by humans or non-humans or caught up in a whirlpool and that you don't rot away, in that case, you will slant, slope, and incline towards Nibbana. Why is that? Because right view slants, slopes, and inclines towards Nibbana. So just briefly a comment on this. So in the translation here, I'm looking at Bhante Suddhāso's translation. He has Nibbana translated as extinguishment, which is one of the ways to translate Nibbana very literally. But it does, of course, require a bit of explanation. That when we talk about extinguishment, we're talking about the extinguishment of greed, hatred, and delusion. So the three fires that burn the mind. Many places in the suttas, the Buddha analogizes our defilements to fire, in the sense of something which is burning, which is painful, tormenting, agitating. So then Buddha's practice is the practice of putting out the fires of the mind, extinguishing those painful, disturbing fires from the mind. And also it's about extinguishing our suffering, fundamentally. It's about extinguishing the fire of dukkha, the fire of torment and discontent and anguish in the mind. So extinguishment here is in fact an accurate translation of Nibbana, but it requires a bit of explanation about what exactly we're talking about. And the Buddha makes this very important statement. He says, right view slants, slopes, and inclines towards extinguishment, towards Nibbana, towards full awakening. So in many places in the suttas, it heavily emphasizes the primacy of right view, the fundamental importance of right view, how without right view, it is impossible to attain awakening. And if one does have right view, then one will naturally, inevitably progress towards awakening. So, in fact, I would even go so far as to say that in the suttas, it's clear that the single most important part of the entire Buddhist path is right view. Because when one has right view, then one will naturally develop all of the other necessary components of the path. Whereas without right view, one is extraordinarily unlikely to cultivate the rest of the path, because one will not understand what is the path and what is not the path. And one will not understand the importance of the path, and the importance of practicing the path correctly. And ultimately, without right view, it's impossible to cultivate wisdom, which is the necessary piece that leads to full awakening. So then, the cultivation of right view should be our top priority above all else. So more important than cultivating mindfulness, more important than cultivating meditative concentration, more important even than practicing generosity or morality. The single most important thing that we need to focus on developing is right view. And the main way of developing right view is, first of all, through reading the suttas. So if one is really serious about practicing Buddhism, then at least once in your life you need to read through all of the suttas, cover to cover, every single one of them, in order to help build up one's foundation of right view. The next major way of cultivating right view is through asking questions. So the Buddha says elsewhere in the suttas, he says the foundation of wisdom is going to experienced monks and priests, experienced people who have dedicated their lives to a religious life, a spiritual life, and asking questions. So asking questions, asking Dhamma questions, particularly to knowledgeable, experienced, and well-developed monks. And through engaging in Dhamma discussion, Dhamma conversations, trying to analyze and come to a deeper understanding of the meaning of what we've been learning through reading the suttas and listening to monks. We then need to engage in conversation in order to come to a deeper understanding. And then what we learn, we then need to apply, seeing our life through the lens of the Dhamma, rather than through the lens of our culture, or through the lens of mass media, or through the lens of whatever memes are popular these days. Instead, we always try to see everything through the lens of the Dhamma, through the lens of right view that we've been building up through reading the suttas, discussing the Dhamma, talking with monks. We use that information as frameworks for seeing the truth of the Buddha's teachings in our direct experience. And if we do this, if we cultivate right view in this way, then that will naturally lead us to cultivating the rest of the Eightfold Path, to cultivating right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. All of it will naturally unfold from right view. So this sutta is one where the Buddha is, as in many other places in the suttas, this is one sutta where the Buddha is emphasizing the primal importance of right view as the basis for the entire Buddhist path, as the necessary condition for correctly practicing the Buddhist path. So I've met a lot of people who think that they are practicing Buddhism, but because they don't have right view, they're not actually practicing correctly. They're just following the instructions of some random teacher who may or may not know what they're talking about. Some random teacher who might be inspiring, might be amazing, but they don't necessarily understand the Buddhist teachings. So we always need to be careful in the cultivation of right view, that we're trying to get as close as possible to the Buddha's original instructions as the basis for developing our understanding of Buddhist thought. So, the Buddha's just given this metaphor, the metaphor of a tree trunk being carried along by the flow of the river, carried along towards the ocean. And in the same way, if we have right view, then we will be carried towards Nibbana. But he says this is only if the tree does not get stuck on the near shore or the far shore, it doesn't sink in the middle of the river, doesn't get stuck on high ground, doesn't get taken away, either by humans or non-humans, or caught in a whirlpool, or that it doesn't rot as it floats along the river. So then one of the monks asked the Buddha for explanation, asked the Buddha to explain this metaphor. So he says, so when the Buddha said this, one of the mendicants asked the Buddha, Bhante, What is the near shore? What is the far shore? What is sinking in the middle? What is getting stranded on high ground? What is getting taken by humans or non-humans? What is getting caught up in a whirlpool? And what is rotting away? So just asking the Buddha to explain the meaning of each one of these images that the Buddha used, each aspect of the metaphor. And so the Buddha says, the near shore is a term for the 6 interior sense fields. The far shore is a term for the 6 exterior sense fields. So then not getting caught up either on the near shore or the far shore. So this means not getting fixated on sensory experiences. So when we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or cognize something, so when we become aware of any sensory experience, we often have a tendency to fixate on it, to get obsessed with it, to start reacting to it with desire or aversion or identity. So we start getting attached and obsessed and fixated and involved in our sensory experiences. So the Buddha here is encouraging us not to get stuck in sensory experience. So keep the mind floating freely towards awakening. So rather than getting caught on the near shore or the far shore, we want the log to keep floating towards the ocean. In the same way, rather than getting caught in sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought, instead we should be letting the mind flow freely. We should be letting the mind pass through life without getting stuck on any particular sensory experience. And this is further emphasized in the next one, where the Buddha says, sinking in the middle is a term for delight and passion. So nandi and raga. Nandi means delight and raga means passion. So this is related actually. So when we're fixating on any particular sensory experience, that's the product of delight and passion. So we're seeking sensory things to enjoy. Or we're fixating and obsessing and becoming impassioned with particular sensory experiences. And impassioned either in a positive sense of desiring the pleasant aspects, or in the negative sense of being aversive towards the unpleasant aspects. These are both manifestations of passion, either the passion for pleasant experience or the passion to hate unpleasant experience. These are both ways that we get stuck in the near shore or the far shore or sink in the middle of the river. Then the next one, the Buddha says, stranded on high ground is a term for the conceit I am. So in Pali, this word asmi mana, asmi means I am, and mana means the concept, or it's commonly translated conceit. So it's a concept of self-existence, self-identity, this constant fixation on me, who I am, who I think I am. So again, when the log that's floating down the river, if it gets stuck on high ground somewhere, then it can no longer be swept along by the current of the river. So the log will not progress towards the ocean. In the same way, when we're constantly fixating on our sense of self, constantly fixating on our self-identity, then we stop making progress towards awakening. We don't progress towards full enlightenment. As long as we're thinking in terms of me and mine, as long as we're focused on myself, my identity, then we will not progress towards awakening. Next, he says, what is getting taken by humans? It is when someone mixes closely with lay people, sharing their joys and sorrows, happy when they're happy, sad when they're sad, and getting involved in their business. That's called getting taken by humans. So again, this is a discourse addressed to monks, as is the case with most of the suttas. Most of the suttas were the Buddha speaking to monks. So as monks, we're trying to separate ourselves from the concerns of lay life. We're trying to separate ourselves from the shallow, superficial concerns of mundane people and mundane activities. So all of the ordinary mundane things that people get fixated on. They get fixated on their romantic interests. They get fixated on their preferred entertainments. They get fixated on managing and running their houses and their businesses. And for lay people, these are all really important things. But for monks, these things are not only completely unimportant, they're actually potentially harmful. Because when we get wrapped up in things like managing houses and running businesses and interfering in people's love lives and interfering and getting wrapped up in people's entertainment, then all of that distracts us from the spiritual path. All of that is an obstacle to cultivating the liberated heart, the heart which is completely free from all attachment and involvement. So the Buddha's encouragement then to monastics is to, well, first off, avoid getting intimately involved with lay people. So if lay people want to do a bunch of lay people things, which they probably do, well, that's their issue. It's not ours. We stay out of their business. If lay people want to do random silly things, well, that's their right. They're lay people. They do whatever they want. But as monastics, we're trying to avoid getting wrapped up in layperson things, to avoid getting wrapped up in householder things. We want our mind to always be focused exclusively on awakening, so that the mind inclines towards nibbana, rather than getting taken away by the concerns of lay people. And the next one, what is getting taken by non-humans? And the Buddha says it's when somebody leads the spiritual life wishing to be reborn in one of the orders of deities, thinking, by this precept or observance or austerity or spiritual life, may I become one of the deities. That's called getting taken by non-humans. So this is another way that we get sidetracked. So some people, when they hear about the different kinds of heaven realms, the different kinds of angels and demigods, then they start thinking, oh, that sounds great. Their lives sound so joyful, so happy, so peaceful, so much better than being a human. And people start thinking, oh, I want to be reborn as a deva. I want to be reborn as an angelic, godlike being. Someone who's living in a heavenly world where everything is joyful and peaceful all the time. But of course, from the Buddhist standpoint, those forms of existence are not ultimately satisfying. They don't bring about transcendent wisdom. They're just another temporary, unsatisfying experience. So we don't want to let the mind get stuck in desire for heavenly existence, because that's not awakening. It's just another sidetrack. It might be like going on a nice vacation, but eventually the vacation comes to an end, and nothing has been improved upon or solved. So in the Buddhist path, we're not trying to be reborn in heaven. We're actually trying to go beyond all states of existence entirely. So we want to watch out for this. When the mind that starts to desire heavenly existence, heavenly rebirth, recognize that is just another trap that prevents the mind from progressing towards the highest happiness. Next, he says, the Buddha says, getting caught up in a whirlpool is a term for the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. So this is this imagery of the whirlpool, so something that's just spinning around in a circle but not going anywhere, is for a reference for the 5 kinds of sensuality. The 5 kinds of sensuality, meaning sensual sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. So this fixation on sensual stimulation through the body. And the imagery of the whirlpool is actually quite lovely, because the whirlpool, it's clearly in motion, seems like it's doing something, but it's not going anywhere. It's just spinning around in agitation. It's just spinning around in a pointless circle. So this is what the pursuit of sensual stimulation is like. It feels like you're doing something, but you're actually just running around in circles. You're not getting anywhere. All you're doing is just creating a lot of turbulence in the mind. without achieving anything of note, without achieving anything truly useful. Then the next one, the Buddha says, what is rotting away? So this is the last way that the log can fail in its progress towards the ocean, rotting away. And so the Buddha says, what is rotting away? He says, it's when someone is immoral, of bad qualities, impure, with suspicious behavior, underhanded, not a true contemplative, not a true spiritual practitioner, although claiming to be one. Someone who is rotten inside, festering, and depraved. This is called rotting away. So this is the example of somebody who does not take morality seriously. Somebody who, if they're a layperson, they don't follow the 5 precepts strictly. So for a layperson, the 5 moral precepts are absolutely critical. They're how we keep our heart from rotting away. So we want to follow them as strictly and diligently as possible. For monastics, it's a bit more complex. We have a lot more rules and precepts and practices that we engage in. But the underlying principle is the same. The underlying principle is not wanting to harm any living being, and instead seeking for ways to benefit living beings. So this is the basic underlying principle of morality in Buddhism. It's the wish to avoid causing harm, and the wish to try to bring benefit, to try to do good, both for ourselves and for others. So this also is pointing out how if one is engaged in spiritual practice, but one does not properly value morality, then that also can lead to one's spiritual practice rotting away before it reaches awakening, before it reaches full enlightenment. So some people, when they start to engage in spiritual practice, they think, oh, the important thing is meditation, the important thing is mindfulness, the important thing is concentration, the important thing is insight. And those are all important things. But if one does not properly cultivate and maintain morality, then one will not make it all the way to full awakening. You might make progress for a while, like the rotting log will still float down the river for a while, but eventually the log will rot away and disperse, and it will not make it to the ocean. So in the same way, if we're practicing mindfulness and concentration, and we're cultivating meditation, and even if we're studying the suttas, but we're not practicing morality, then eventually our spiritual practice will rot away. It will not make it all the way to full awakening. And so then the sutta continues with a narrative. So it says, now at that time, Nanda the cowherd was sitting not far from the Buddha. And he said to the Buddha, I will not collide with the near shore or the far shore, or sink in the middle, or get stranded on a high ground. And I will not get taken by humans or non-humans, or caught in a whirlpool, and I won't rot away. Bhante, may I receive the going forth and ordination in the Buddha's presence. So this is quite lovely. So Nanda the cowherd, hearing this discourse, was inspired to become a monk. And the Buddha says, well then, Nanda, return the cows to their owners. And Nanda replies, Bhante, the cows will go back by themselves, since they love their calves. And the Buddha says, still, Nanda, you should return them to their owners. So this I find quite cute. So of course the Buddha is appreciating Nanda's desire to become a monk, Nanda's aspiration to live a perfect and pure holy life, spiritual life. But again, we just spoke about the importance of morality. So the Buddha is saying, like, well, you're still responsible for all of those cows. You're still responsible for all those sentient beings with you. And those are also the property of somebody else's. Now, those cows belong to somebody else. So if you want to keep your morality pure, then you first need to make sure that you take care of the cows that you're watching over, and also that you are attentive to how your choices affect other people. So if Nanda just abandons the cows, well, they might go back to their owners, or they might not. So that would be causing harm to the people who own those cows, not treating them with kindness and respect. So the first thing is to do what's respectful and kind, which is to return the cows to their owners. Then one might be able to become a monk. So the story continues. So then Nanda, after returning the cows to their owners, went to the Buddha and said to him, "Bhante, I have returned the cows to their owners. May I receive the going forth and ordination in the Buddha's presence?" And the sutta says, the cowherd Nanda received the going forth and the ordination in the Buddha's presence, and not long after his ordination, Venerable Nanda became one of the arhants. So that's the end of the discourse. We can now respect it with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And at this time, if there's any questions, I'll take some questions. So hello to the people checking in online. Hello to Maria, Gregory, Jayanta, Yankee, Anna Maria, Bhumika, Charles Lee, Karuna, Niranjan, Tora, Nirmala, Mayani, and everybody else who's joining in. So there's a couple of questions here. Nirmala says, when worldly things are going against the Dharma, how to protect or take care of the mind to be in peace always? Well, as much as possible, try to avoid being involved in worldly things that go against the Dhamma. So when there are mundane things that we need to take care of, well, we take care of them based upon the principles of the Dhamma. We take care of them while keeping strict control over our morality. We take care of them while focusing on maintaining kindness and compassion, considering how our choices affect all the people involved, including animals and insects. So we always want to cultivate that mind of thoughtfulness, of consideration, of compassion for all beings affected by our choices. And we also want to interact with those mundane necessities in a peaceful way, a calm way. So not being irritated by the fact that we have some mundane thing to do, but rather just seeing it as something which we need to do with serenity, with tranquility, with a peaceful mind. And it's also important to ask, do we really need to be caught up in these mundane affairs? Or is there a way that we can reduce the mundane affairs in our life, reduce the mundane things in our life? Can we live a simpler life, a less complicated life, so that then there's fewer mundane things to disturb the mind? Nirmala says, won't there be Dhamma talks on Thursday and Saturday? So on this channel, there's always Dhamma talks Thursday morning and evening. There is no online Dhamma talk on Saturdays, but there is one in person at the monastery, Saturday evenings. Mani says, Bhante, what is the far shore? So I just went through that in the discourse, Mani, so you can always reread the suttas if you want to catch the things that you missed on the first run. But again, as the Buddha says, the near shore is the internal senses, the 6 interior sense fields, which means eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. The far shore is the exterior sense fields, which means sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. So in this particular metaphor, the far shore, it means the exterior senses, the objects of our senses, sense objects, which is different how the Buddha normally uses the term far shore. He normally uses far shore as a metaphor to mean full awakening. But in this particular sutta, he's not using it in that way. In this particular sutta, it's a reference to the sensory objects. And Manny says, and the challenges of the monks are similar to lay life. Well, then that means there's a serious problem with how people are living their monastic life. If someone's living their monastic life in a way that's similar to lay life, then that means they're fundamentally not understanding the point of monastic life. So Mani says, say when building a temple, could this affect your practice? Yeah, ideally monks should not be building temples for exactly this reason. If lay people want to build a temple for the monks, that's great. But if you look at how monastic life is described in the suttas, monks are supposed to be itinerant mendicants. They're supposed to be wandering beggars, homeless wandering beggars. So monks ideally shouldn't be involved in building temples, but lay people can build temples for monks. That's a nice thing to do. Offer dwellings to the Sangha, that's a nice thing to do, good karma. And it is the responsibility of monks to really examine how they are living their monastic life. And if they are living their monastic life like a lay life, then there's no point, is there? Then it's just a kind of crappy, cheap knockoff of a layperson's life. That's not so useful. So if one is going to live the monastic life, then one should focus on living a monastic life, which means cutting oneself away from lay-like concerns, layperson-like activities and concerns. And Gregory says, how much learning of right view is enough to shift one's time to meditation? So as mentioned, you should read through the suttas cover to cover at least once in your life. And actually twice is good, because usually on the second read through you'll understand a lot more. And how much right view is enough? When you're fully awakened, that's when it's enough. That's the last question. So if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and conclude at this time. Okay, so we'll go ahead and conclude the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.